And welcome everyone to the next panel, which is boarding at all doors or none at all. This panel is about how rapid policy and culture change, especially as we have seen in the past year with COVID, allow us to push the envelope in terms of policy, design, and innovation. And we'll be touching on mobility, public space, transit, and the regulatory framework, and really picking up some of the great threads from the previous conversation as we talk about the potential for fundamental shifts made in crisis mode to become permanent and the degree to which we have seen that in all of our work. I am pleased to be joined by three fantastic panelists who I will introduce in just a moment, but first wanted to just briefly offer my own lens on this topic in my own work as mentioned at Transportation Alternatives. So again, my name is Katie Laura. I'm with Transportation Alternatives. We're an advocacy group in New York City. We have been around for about 50 years, pushing for safe streets and better walking, biking, and public transit in the city. We work across every neighborhood on local projects as well as at the city and state level. And we push for design changes like protected bike lanes and pedestrian safety improvements at intersections, as well as on policy changes like automatic speed camera enforcement in school zones. Legalizing e-bikes and scooters was a big recent push, and removing the police department from traffic enforcement. So across kind of the spectrum of design and policy. So when COVID hit, as many of us did, we saw a fundamental shift in how our streets are being used and who they were for. Of course, subway and bus ridership plummeted immediately. We saw cycling boom. We saw our sidewalks and our outdoor spaces become increasingly valuable as places to get fresh air or socialize at a safe distance or even have a meal when outdoor dining began. And really, it seemed like people were open for the first time, or for the first time in a long time, to reimagine what our streets could be, and who they're for and who they serve. And then actually 1 year ago today, Mayor Bill de Blasio announced a pilot of the Open Streets program to pedestrianize streets across the city by closing them to car traffic and allowing neighbors to use them as public spaces. And this is something, of course, that has been happening around the world, but our New York City program began a year ago today. And then just yesterday, the mayor announced that his budget would include $4 million to keep the Open Streets program going, which to us is an indication that this shift that happened under the crisis may become something more permanent. And the last thing I'll say is just that our work at Transportation Alternatives has also shifted in the past year from crisis mode to kind of thinking about where the opportunities are for permanent shifts. It's become super normal for a lot of us to walk down the middle of the street or eat a meal sitting outside. And the public conversation has shifted around, what our streets are for, who they're serving. And of course, in New York City, we're in an election year for a new mayor, and most of our city council is going to turn over. So as mentioned in the intro, our NYC 25 by 25 challenge makes the case for really what's a monumental reclaiming of our largest public space, our streets, for people, not cars, by taking back 25% of the space by 2025. This is a lot of space. It's the equivalent of about 13 central parks that is currently just being used to move and store private cars for free. And instead of that, we want to see a truly connected network of busways and bike lanes, a massive expansion of open streets that allows everyone access to the space in their own neighborhood, and the reclaiming of parking spaces for things like off-street trash pickup, micro-mobility hubs, and bike parking, among many, many other improvements that can be made. And so far, about 150 different community groups have joined our coalition to push for this vision. And we've already gotten several mayoral and city council frontrunners to speak up in support of it. So we're hoping that it really is kind of a sea change moment. We've also heard from dozens of city leaders around the country and around the world who might want to do something similar. And I'll just close by saying, to me, this is a far cry from New York's last mayoral election, when one of the frontrunners actually said he wanted to rip up all the protected bike lanes. So we see this year and this moment as kind of a potential major shift in the way our city prioritizes mobility and public space, and for whom. And if you're interested, you can learn more about transportation alternatives and the 25 by 25 challenge at transalt.org. So enough about me and that. I am pleased to be joined today by an exciting panel of speakers, and I'll introduce all three, and then each will present their work, and we'll spend the second half in conversation. So first up will be Xin-Pei Tsai. Xin-Pei is Global Head of Cities and Transportation Policy at Uber, where she leads a team focused on creating a sustainable, inclusive, and multimodal urban future. Previously to that, she founded Make Public, which is a social impact analysis firm that specializes in the public realm. And she was executive director of Gale Institute, a nonprofit that advocated for public life and public spaces. Xin-Pei was also the deputy executive director of Transit Center here in New York, a national foundation focused on improving urban transportation, and she was the director of the Cities and Transportation Program at the Energy and Climate Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Xin-Pei has served on the New York City Public Design Commission and has also taught urban design at Columbia and the Persian School of Design. Our second panelist will be Justin Cotsea, CEO and co-founder of Go Metro, which is a transport technology lab based in Cape Town, South Africa. He's also CEO of Go Essendal, a partnership between Go Metro and the international bus operator Essendal. Justin has a background in public transit planning, optimization, and technology projects in cities in Africa and Latin America. He has led product design, development, and customer development at Go Metro for the last 7 years. And Go Essendal is active in the UK, the US, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, South Africa, India, and Hong Kong. And lastly, we'll be joined by Olivier Faubert, co-founder of Roofscapes. Olivier is a graduate student in architecture here at MIT. He's interested in environmental design, social equity, and sustainable real estate. And together with his co-founders Eitan Levi and Tim Cousins, he founded Roofscapes, which is dedicated to developing green spaces on the roofs of historic buildings to mitigate climate change and the adverse effects of urban densification. So Roofscapes was part of MIT DesignX's 4th cohort in the spring of 2020 last year, before its incorporation earlier this year in Paris. And prior to MIT, Olivier worked in architecture and urban design practices in Zurich, London, and Mumbai. And he studied architecture at the Swiss Institute of Technology in Lausanne. And with that, I will turn it over to our first panelist, Xin-Pei. Thank you.
Thanks for the great introduction, Katie. Really wonderful to join this discussion with everyone. As Katie said, I'm Xin-Pei Tsai, the global head of policy for cities and transportation. And what I thought I'd do is just lay out, respond to a prompt that we received, which was to describe a little bit of our work, describe the problem that we're trying to solve, and then and I know that we're going to get into a lot more detail in the course of conversation. But what I'd like to do is share my screen here, and Katie, let me see if I can pull that up. Hang on one second. Let me know if you can see it. Okay.
Yes,
Can you see this? Oh, great. Okay. So, Katie, by way of introduction, thank you for all the background on me, but I guess the main thing is I feel like I'm still on the same mission at Uber as I have been in all the various roles I've played. And just by way of setting the problem I'm trying to, that I think of day to day, is the world's population is rapidly urbanizing, cities are growing, and as cities grow, mobility demand increases. Mobility demand is supposed to double. And at the same time, we have to decrease climate emissions by 60%. Transportation emissions are the fastest growing sector for climate, for carbon emissions. And I think that when I think over the last 10 years of work in the international arena, we have a sense of the best practices, but it's been very hard to make progress against this, and transport commissions continues to grow. The other thing I think a lot about, though, is then what does that mean for the city we love, in the neighborhoods we love? And I also use this as a principle in the work, which is that every urban trip, regardless of the mode you choose, starts with a walk. And so that global challenge that we have then is manifest at a local level, where we need to balance the demand for moving around with a need for creating wonderful, great places in our cities. And then a final principle here is then, how do we do this in an inclusive way? And I'm showing a couple of images of the town I grew up in, which is Syracuse, the city I grew up in, Syracuse. And on the left is a city that is a neighborhood, Ward 15, that was a historically Black neighborhood that was essentially demolished to create the highway infrastructure on the right-hand side. This was the neighborhood that existed. It was a mixed-use residential neighborhood. This is exactly where that spot is today. And this happens all over the world. I just wanted to give you a sense of where exactly this interstate still goes. This happens all over the world and results in people not having access to transportation across neighborhoods, to services, to jobs, to things that they need. And then by way of trying to get there, not having the infrastructure that supports sustainable ways of getting there either. And this happens to be a photo from the US, but you can imagine this happening in many cities around the world, in emerging economies, in developing regions, in fast-growing cities. This kind of inequitable distribution of safe, sustainable, inclusive infrastructure happens over and over again. And then the other kinds of pieces of data that I think about in this problem setting is then just how dominant private car use is. This is a snapshot of Los Angeles from, I believe, 2017 to 2019. Just over 91% of all trips take place in a personal vehicle. Transit has a little bit of it, maybe 3-4%. And then the 5% of all the shared modes, the on-demand shared modes, it's 5%. And this is the kind of situation that I think has both taken place and is creating the transportation carbon challenge that we have, but it's also, I think, also at risk of being replicated over and over again in many cities around the world. And then during COVID, what we saw that was really interesting is, that congestion to go down, traffic volumes fell in April, but they are rapidly close to above or even close to pre-COVID or above pre-COVID levels. So as I mentioned, with the shared modes, only 5% of that really is our trips. So what we're looking at is essentially the rise of private car driving. In our work on the platform, what we saw is that demand for ride hail during COVID stayed essentially constant. There was a lot less drop in lower income communities than in higher income communities. It was constant for people who still needed to get to work, which were the essential workers. So the people who don't have the privilege of working from home still need to move around. Transit agencies, because for safety reasons or because of budget reasons, did have to rethink service. And many of them, pivoted quickly, but I think in many cases service was cut. And we also partnered with transit agencies because of that to provide some late night or late night service or first last mile trips to transit to help support people getting to work. And this is just one of the ways that we see that there is some value of using on-demand to supplement what a transit system can provide. So just moving forward into thinking a lot and hard about what had happened during COVID, what were the challenge in front of us, we felt very strongly that we couldn't return to normal, that we needed to establish a new normal. And we decided that we would make a global commitment to become a zero emission platform by 2040 because of our global footprint, but in the US, Canada, and Europe by 2030. And we would do that by expanding our hybrid and EV rides, helping drivers go electric, investing in multimodal. The point of this commitment is not to replace every car for electric car. The point is to create a multimodal ecosystem where then, back to that bar chart I showed of when you need a car, it's an electric car, but what we're trying to do is create more choices for the multimodal, for the transit choice, for the biking and walking. That should happen. These are our commitments. I think most significantly, the next 5 years are very important because that's where the total cost of ownership, the economics don't necessarily work out for electric vehicles at this point. So we're investing $800 million of resources directed at drivers to help them make the transition. And I can talk more, I can share more about how we're thinking through that in an inclusive way. I wanted to show something that, but in supporting I wanted to just show how, the shared on-demand mode is such a small sliver of transportation moving forward. Forecasts all show to 2030 that the majority of trips will still happen in private cars around the world. This global miles traveled, public transit as well has a good chunk of it, and we would love to see public transit take on more. And then we see on-demand as supporting that transit-oriented trip in a city. We have a few capabilities to connect riders to transit, from journey planning, that ticketing, integrated ticketing. We also are developing product to help agencies use on-demand capabilities. They can, for example, Marin County use their own vehicles with their own drivers to deploy paratransit and meet paratransit demand dynamically. And we are thinking a lot about, what happens to the future of transit operations. This is a white paper we wrote based on conversations we had with agencies that just talked about from their view, becoming mobility managers, having all the tools at their disposal, serving their constituencies, a broader diversity of constituents, maintaining geographic service areas, but doing it cost effectively. This is sort of a synthesis of where the needs might be for transit agencies. And again, transit is always going to be the backbone of those cities that we're imagining in the future, for walkable cities, for great cities that have great neighborhoods. And then these are ways that a transit agency can think beyond fixed route, fixed schedule, and use other tools in their disposal. We also integrated micromobility in our work. We're now in 85 cities through our partnership with Lime. And we're thinking about curb spaces. I love TA's 25 by 25 campaign. It's so inspiring. And I think that kind of thinking has just not been near enough. There's so much potential around how we should think about the space in cities. We created a curbside productivity metric just to show that parked cars just are not nearly as productive, to help make that case. And a project I did in New York City actually was a kind of convergence of many of these factors. We were helping restaurants winterize outdoor space when indoor dining was compromised. And this takes up curb space. This helps with delivery. This hopefully makes those neighborhoods, expands the public spaces in those neighborhoods, and makes way for COVID recovery. So that's Just to sum it up, I think that is my last slide. So I'll leave it at that and look forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that presentation. Let's turn it over now to Justin.
Thank you. Yeah, let me try and share my screen and go full screen. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. It's really, really lovely to be here and a real honor to be part of this panel. I'm coming to you from Cape Town, South Africa. So it's a bit dark here. It's in the evening, but it's really, really good to join you. So my name is Justin Cotsea. I'm CEO of the Go Ascendal Group, and I'll just tell you a little bit about the work that we've been doing in a few minutes. So just a little bit about who Go Ascendal is. It's the partnership between, it's an innovative partnership between the Ascendal Group and Go Metro. The Ascendal Group operates buses and is a public transport operator in multiple markets around the globe. And Go Metro is a business that I founded and started. It's a technology platform. And so we're working now in about 120 cities right now, distributing the platform, getting it into city planners' hands, and changing operations globally. Just a few projects, rather what we're aiming to do is really put the right tools in the hands of city planners, helping with data and technology to change how mobility solutions are implemented. And as we see the great drive for electrification and change in operations, there's a huge need for better systems than what we have before. Just a few projects that we've been working on, just to give you a snapshot of what we do and where we're working from. So in Cape Town, we're implementing a fleet management system in the informal transit sector, helping informal transport businesses to formalize. In Cambridge, we've got a technology accelerator where we take promising products and technologies into the workshop. We have about 80 buses that run with Whippet coaches as one of Ascendal's operations, and we're testing technologies live on buses in operations to see how they implement. We're helping Miami-Dade County reach a gold standard in its BRT, all electric, huge TOD strategy. And we're very, very proud of the support that we're giving the county in Miami to reach gold standard, to be a gold standard BRT. In Latin America, we're working in Buenos Aires to help manage a network redesign of 18,000 buses, as well as run a 29-city big data platform for the Latin American Mobility Observatory, one of the longest standing data collection efforts in transport planning. And then in India, in the Tamil Nadu state, we're helping with the procurement and implementation of 2,500 electric buses over the next 5 years, getting all these systems ready for that. So this just gives you a snapshot of the work that we're doing. But I really wanted to focus in the theme of not letting anyone get left behind, and focus on our work in informal transit in South Africa. And it's really based on a piece of software that we've developed called Measure, Model, Manage, Move, that is helping us give technology and put technology in the hands of informal transit operators, and helping them run their businesses. And it's been instrumental for a number of operators to get through COVID in the last 2 years. So in Cape Town in South Africa, we've got a little mapping app which allows us to digitize operations. When I say informal transit, I mean these vans that generally connect poor communities with CBDs, work centers, and opportunities. They run from 5 in the morning till 10 at night. They don't run to a schedule. You have to ask at the door what it'll cost you to get around. And if they sense that you're not quite sure of where you're going, you're probably going to get charged double. But we've piloted over the last 5 years a methodology that allows us to firstly discover the network and understand how the city is connected, to profile the ridership and the earning potential and the operational efficiencies of each route, to look at each vehicle and the footprint of the vehicle, look at the business value calculations, and really help these loose collectives start thinking about corporatization, licensing, regulation, and reform. What we've learned, though, out of this work is that you can't just view the informal transit network as a aspiring formal transit network, or it's a baby bus network, or it's an immature bus system. But rather it is the thread and the vein of a complex social fabric, and understanding the community means that you'll be able to design and support public transit that works for the community. One of the biggest lessons I found was standing in the line early in the morning and you see the vehicles depart. You really are, it's easy to think that they're all just having the same experience, and each vehicle is just a module of a whole. However, when we looked at the data, we found that a small cluster of vehicles were earning the large majority of revenue, with a huge middle earning very little. And it really came down to driver choices, driver behavior, and the driver knowing the community. And so building demand responsive services and building demand responsive networks, it's not about the technology. It's about the needs of the community, and it's about understanding where people want to go. And I'll show you a picture of that shortly. So we really dug deep into the data and understood, how does this community of 20,000 people move around? What are the routes that they're operating? And you can see when you look at it with traditional GPS and traditional routing, it looks, you could say, a little bit confusing. But when you drill down into the data and you understand at a human level and at a personal level, each one of those dots represents a person boarding and a person trying to get somewhere. So every dot is aspirational. Every dot is about accessing opportunities. Every dot is someone's story. And so understanding that when we come in and we try and implement a technology, a lesson we had when we tried to implement a GPS tracking system and a bus routing and scheduling system, we implemented the service, we implemented the technology, and the drivers decided to just drive like this, completely against the blue line. If you can't follow, the blue line is where he should be driving. The purple line is where he chose to drove. And so just looking at how the drivers were still responding, despite the implementation of technology, to the needs of the community, really led us to understand that we got to come in with a light touch. We were able to, working over the last 3 years with this operation, halve the assets required for the service. We were able to not lose any job, but improve labor conditions and not cut into earnings. And we reduced fuel by half. Just by working with the community, working with the operators, and really trying to focus on efficiencies, we were able to have a really significant impact. And that's really the lesson I wanted to share with you this afternoon. Just a little bit about our work in Rwanda. We've helped recently the city of Kigali redesign its bus network. And so when you go downtown, this is what you see at Nyabugogo Terminal. And it's really, again, humans just trying to access opportunities. That's what a transport network is. And so our data was able to look at what vehicles were doing, what they were, which ways they were operating, and very interestingly, the behaviors of the vehicles really matched our informal transit network. Changing routing based on road conditions, traffic ahead, roadblocks, all sorts of conditions. And so being able to map each route and understand each route meant that we were able to offer really practical infrastructure improvements and a stepwise change to service improvements as we go along. And then just in Nagpur, India, if we think about what we get out of a city today, if you went into a city with traditional data collection and what's visible, you're probably only going to get the data that you see there, which is some public transit, some bus, some private cars are registered. But what about the motorbike taxis? What about the enormous amounts of pedestrians? How do we digitize our cities, our emerging market cities, so that we don't leave anybody behind, that we're not only looking at the digitized as visible in our new digital planning methods, but rather really working hard to try and be inclusive of our data collection. This is something that we're working on at Go Metro, and we really would be quite keen to explore further with partners. So just some questions. So what to help our discussion as we start, what our target is, where we're going. Well, as planners, are we on the same missions as our communities? Is our community's objectives private vehicle reduction, or is it rather social equity? Is our community's objective accessibility, mobility, or rather radical economic transformation or transport for the poor? Are our missions aligned with that of the communities that we serve? If we say, well, I'll leave my car at home when there's good public transport, there'll never be good public transport as long as we are not forced to leave our cars at home. So we've got to remove that excuse. You know, the first and last mile will never be deliberate, thoughtful, strong, encouraging, and exciting if we allow the first mile to be a few steps on the driveway to the car, or a few steps in the parking lot to the car. We can't fund both worlds. We really need to decide. And I think that the choice is obvious, but we need to decide. Having the excuse that I'll wait until public transport gets better and then I'll leave my car, it's a get out of jail free card for the middle class. We can't all just wait for this to be miraculously fixed. Otherwise, we're going to end up with public transit in the eternal death spiral that it seems to be in. So, trends to accelerate. More congestion, please. Let's keep people in their cars for a while to make congestion even worse after COVID. Let's really slow our traffic down. Let's cut that speed by 5 or 10 miles per hour. Let's just kill parking. Less parking everywhere. More expensive fuel. Let's really get taxes that are ring fenced for change out of fuel purchases. More parking charges, less parking bays, more taxes, and carbon taxes on usage, so that we can innovate on the urgent need for transport provision, so that we can bring more public attention to what's a hidden crisis. More spend on public transport leads to better services, leads to better outcomes. We just simply need more funding. And more dedicated bus lanes. The number one thing that we can do to make public transport more exciting, more enticing, is dedicated bus lanes to increase commercial speeds. Do that, and the middle class will follow. And then, of course, developers who will include sustainable mobility in their planning. So these are just some thoughts and some strategies that we'd like to see implemented. We just one last parting thought. We tolerate 12 to 24 months of inconvenience if there's a freeway being upgraded. We're happy to drive in one lane out of 3 while they're upgrading it. But what if we placed severe restrictions for 24 months? What changes would happen, and would those changes stick? Would it be worth it? Well, I certainly think so. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Justin, for that presentation. Let's pass it over to Olivier now.
Sure. Katie, of course, tell me if there's something wrong with my slides.
All good.
Hi, everyone. I'm Olivier. I'm a candidate in the Master in Architecture here at MIT and co-founder of Roofscapes, a startup dedicated to developing green and accessible platforms on the roof of dense urban centers. Roofscape was funded last year by 3 graduate students in architecture and real estate in the School of Architecture and Planning, with interest in, as said, environmental design, social equity, and sustainable real estate. We were proud to be part of the 2020 cohort of MIT DesignX last year, which I have to say really helped us make our first step as a venture. So green and accessible surfaces of the roof of dense urban cities, why bother, you will wonder? Well, the idea, the need emerged a few years ago, actually, during the summers of 2018 and 2019, that saw back-to-back the hottest recorded temperatures in the history of Paris. This was, of course, due to climate degradation, but it was accelerated by the artificialization of surfaces everywhere in the city, with a lot of heat-absorbing materials, such as asphalt or the zinc of Paris roof, and also a great lack of vegetation. And this whole situation brought an incredible traction, political traction and momentum to urban vegetation, particularly on flat roofs, as they were the first available surfaces in the city. And as aspiring architects interested in the lack of outdoor spaces in cities, in building renovation, in the promises of tactical urbanism, in the necessary fight for biodiversity regeneration, all of this momentum really caught our attention. And we were actually thrilled that the city managed to attain its target of 100 hectares of green roof by 2020. But looking at all that, we soon realized that this progress was doomed to slow down, because quickly flat roof or flat surfaces would start to lack in Paris. And indeed, as you can see here, the city center, where the heat waves are by far the most vivid, is really composed of 60% of pitch roof. So the majority of the building stock will not in any way be part of this climate resilience strategies. So we asked the question, what solutions for the digitalization and access of pitch roof in Paris? And well, this is why we created Roofscapes, to deploy lightweight wooden platforms that would be vegetalized and accessible by inhabitants, with this vision of creating a new datum at the roof level that would first cover the zinc of Paris roof with wood and soil, thus preventing overheat in summer, but it would also provide outdoor amenities for inhabitants and help regenerate local biodiversity. And to do all that structurally, we knew that the carpentry roof of Paris would not be able to support such added loads. So the way we proceeded was to rest our prefabricated system on the masonry walls of Paris building, which have historically been over-designed and are fully capable of taking such charges. And this strategy has worked hand in hand with our will to preserve as much of the historic building as possible and reduce the roof alteration. So with sustainability in mind, we were heading down, getting ready to deploy our first pilot project in Paris, talking to biodiversity experts, to urban farmers, and we had a whole strategy ready. And I think the theme of today's symposium, the pandemic hit, February 2020. So lockdown in Paris, everyone at home. And what did we see? What sort of drastically changed in the city? Well, very quickly, we saw a 10% increase in real estate value for assets that have an access to outdoor space or balcony. And this sort of freaked us out because as one of the main symptoms of gentrification in a place where the housing market is already unaffordable and saturated, increase in real estate prices couldn't really be good at all. So we wondered, wait, what's going on the other side of the spectrum? And what happens to everyone who doesn't have the means to pay this 10% premium? And I think this is where we really started to think about spatial inequity in the city. And in a place like the center of Paris, it's particularly visible in the north and the south, composed of aging social housing units built hastily during the 1930s to replace former slums. And these habitations replicated all around the city have been historically inhabited by newcomers and underserved communities, and they offer little balconies, no outdoor amenities, nor community gathering spaces. So people are either locked in or pushed out in the street. And I think this diverted our short-term scalability timeline from the city would climatically benefit from all these systems being implemented everywhere to, wait, some areas actually need such implementations way more urgently than others. So the way that we moved forward was to partner with the city of Paris and their laboratory for urban experimentation as a way to ensure meaningful contact with social landlords and local tenant association, but also to ensure that our upcoming pilot project would go through a stringent 12 months monitoring process to assess its climatic and cultural impacts. And with such a partner, we have also obtained that our work will be reviewed and considered for Paris new zoning code that will be written in 2023. And this, I think, is a pretty promising victory for us because we have experienced firsthand how complicated it is to deploy such a system in the existing policy framework. It doesn't make it eventually impossible, but it completely bars entry to the majority of the people in the city. We luckily were able to breach such barriers because of the specific academic voice that we were given by being here and the help of MIT DesignX. But it's unveiling a hard truth about the fairness of the urban landscape in Paris. We have witnessed the total lack of diversity in the voices that are today recognized and empowered by urban institutions. And that was for us a stark reminder that top-down innovation cannot really be an end in itself. If innovation just leads to another concentration of power for a venture like ours to take up all the space it created by spearheading the opening of a new market, I feel that we as a society are missing something. I think impact, on the contrary, happens when this new space that is created is shared with voices that until now have been unheard. The real change, maybe the real profound social disruption, will not happen for us with mere financial success, but when the discussion table around this topic is broadened and when power over who get to decide what the urban landscape is eventually shared. So this is where we are now. We hope and we believe that through groundwork and policy change, we would eventually get there. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Olivier. Okay, we're going to open it up now to some questions. And I think, to start off, because this is a panel and a topic around kind of the relationship between innovation and regulatory framework, or at least that's how I interpreted it, I would like to actually start with you, Olivier, again, just for a few more words on how you see your work as fitting within an existing regulatory framework or policy landscape, and how you see it kind of pushing the boundaries of this framework. And so we'll pass it to Olivier, and then either of the other panelists, if you want to jump in and answer the same question, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think we touched upon this a little just now in the presentation, so maybe I can give it a quick answer and pass the mic afterwards. But yeah, I think what we are actually doing by not having been tested ever before is a bit hesitant in finding its place in the existing regulatory framework. It's not that it goes necessarily against the framework or that there's much in place for us to know how to be guided. I think it's in these kind of situations that that you're going a bit beyond the existing framework. And in that, we're very lucky to operate in a city like Paris that believes in the power of urban innovation. We've, for example, been invited to participate in a public manifesto that is titled Manifesto for a New Persian Aesthetic. That is not a regulatory text by itself, but it aspires to inform upcoming zoning codes and create sort of a revisited aesthetic guidelines to redefine and broaden what the city considers Parisian, and thus opens new doors for new urban interventions that push social equity agendas and climate resilience agenda. But we also know that the policy change come with the coordination of many actors, and this is where maybe lies one of the power of design, to give very tangible reasons for actors of the city to sit together and to talk about the future of the city. And at the same time, I think we want to be very careful and procedural in choosing the way this policy framework is redefined, or at least as far as the roof usage is concerned. Because we operate in the end in the landscape, a policy landscape that is being set by the city of Paris. And it was important for us to have their approval. It was important for us to know that they have an eye on what we do, to set up a monitoring process that encapsulate both what we want to know from this implementation, but also everything that they want to know. Because in the end, if us or other stakeholders around the project are invited to the discussion table, it will eventually be the city who will redefine in 2023 the policy landscape for the years to come. So I think in all, I would say looking for contact with them, looking for transparency is an important step for us early on to ensuring that the voices around this project are heard, and that the upcoming policy changes will eventually allow in the future a much broader sense of stakeholders to contribute to their urban landscape.
Thank you. Would either of our other panelists like to pick up any of these threads?
I think when presenting something new and innovative, such as the work that we've seen, it's as much about awareness, education, and building a knowledge base on something new so that it can be evaluated and so that it can be understood and it can be related to. And certainly I think the most important lever of that we have as innovative thinkers and implementers is education and awareness. And so we've partnered with a number of universities that we've tried to help with research, freely share our data, open up our data for independent research and papers to be written, presented at every possible transport conference in the cities that we operate in, and then just have as many tours and visits as possible. And so awareness and education that this thing is valuable and it does work, does help move the policy change window that you want to see.
Great. And how about you, Shinpei?
It's like with Uber, just pick your regulatory framework that is being discussed. There's quite a few that end up being relevant to the platform. Everything from human trafficking, women's safety, privacy, and then the transportation side. There's quite a few different areas that Uber is involved with. But on the, maybe let's sticking to the transportation policy frame. I think that Uber has plays a specific role in the entire ecosystem, right? It provides an on-demand service. It ideally is complementing high volume types of ways of getting around, sustainable choices, active transportation. Many of the things that Justin showed are things that we're supportive of. And I think what's been interesting about kind of being in this arena at Uber is then all the different angles, the political aspect, not just the policy definition, the political aspect, the power dynamics come into play very strongly. So, we're very supportive of, for example, of transit operations funding, especially in COVID recovery for the next 2 years. We think it will be crucial for cities in order to recover from the, to recover some of the ridership. And you can still see predictions of ridership staying below pre-COVID levels till 2023 in some cases, some cities. But at the same time, I believe that should come along with some perhaps changes in procurement or changes in requirements for the kinds of ways that transit agencies can procure services and work with other operators. So they're not limited. They have a wider set of tools in order to serve their customers in a cost-effective way, since budgets are so compromised. Another example is, actually, I'll just leave it at that. But you can kind of see how, those kinds of things, we feel it's not a direct play for Uber, right, necessarily, but we try to show up and try to show support in those arenas where we can.
Great, thank you. I want to pick up now on a thread of something that I was pleased to see in all of your presentations, which is just about sort of the decision-making process and inclusivity, and I think has actually been a theme of this symposium at large. But I'm curious to what degree the past year of crisis has shed light for you on how decisions are made, whose voices are included or excluded from these processes. And do you see any emerging opportunities to become more inclusive in our policy and design practices sort of in this moment of crisis? And I will throw it to you first, Justin, on this one.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so in a lot of emerging markets, your majority carrier of essential workers, of workers in general, is the informal transit modes, and they have just been badly left behind and wrong-footed by this pandemic, because you can't social distance on a vehicle that seats 13 people. You can't social distance and dish out masks and sanitize hands when you're living on $1 a day yourself as a driver or an operator. So just the witnessing the response to COVID here in South Africa, we basically couldn't come out of lockdown until the government had a plan to deal with informal transit, because everyone would need to go back to work and we need to move around, and the pandemic would just spread enormously. And so we stayed in lockdown, I think probably for an extra 2 or 3 weeks as a country of 60 million people, because we were not grappling for years and years and years with the reality of how people move around. If they're not walking, they're using informal transit, or maybe they're entering the the class that gets to own vehicles. So I think it was felt by every single person here that we couldn't open up because we hadn't dealt with this problem. And it was almost as though decades of neglect on the urban fringe and on the transit network, decades of ignoring a mode that carries 70% of the population but doesn't get a subsidy, was catching up to us. And so coming out of this pandemic now, we're suddenly talking about welfare grants for drivers and recapitalization and aggressive investment in a mode which it has proven to be resilient. And so we're, I think, seeing that the pandemic has really brought to bear all those left out. And if one goes down, we all go down. And so we are more connected than ever before, which I think is a positive from this pandemic.
Feel free to jump in, Shinpei or Olivier, if you want to talk about this.
Okay, yeah, maybe I can jump in here. I feel for us, before we were approaching this issue mainly with the climate urgency in mind and our role as student interested, as said, in climate science or building technology, sustainable design, we had a relative legitimacy to engage in this discussion, because what we brought to the table was a skill-based proficiency. But as part of the value we're trying to create now has shifted more and more towards allowing access to outdoor community spaces. I mean, I think we have less of a strong voice to speak of how those low-income housing buildings should be operated, because what is needed for such a work is not a skill-based proficiency anymore, but a life-informed ground experience. People who are living there, families who live this lack of outdoor space, who live through this spatial injustice. And I think here it's critical for us to recognize that our agency can help these voices being heard at the city level, but in no way our agency should allow or should push us to put our words in front of theirs in this specific topic. Because as said, now the purpose of what we do is different. We went from a project that was very technical and that now is increasingly social. And so the targeted impact is different. And by definition, by necessity, the voices heard should be different. And we hope that such a project would not end up being a sort of like self-reference innovation echo chamber, but that through our work on the ground and through subsequent policy changes, we can sort of tear down the boundaries of entry for a lot more voices to step in. And yeah, I think as a side note, it was important for us when doing such a work not to be discouraged by people who early on were not believing in what we do and were like, we don't believe in you can make money, or we don't believe it's infrastructure, it's very expensive, it's real estate, it's complicated, it would take a while. But the way we see impact is not on how quickly we can capture the value we create as the sole factor defining whether we're worth or not. Our impact, we hope one day, will be the environment, will be spatial justice, will be impact on policy change. And all these things aren't necessarily quantified so well in the world, and particularly in the startup world. I remember one of our early discussion with industry people, and they were like, oh, we love your system. Now, how are you going to quickly build 10,000 of them? And we were like, wait, what? This is not a project just about wooden planks on a roof. Like, it's about people in the first place. So maybe we can try and rephrase this question as, how are we going to quickly build 10,000 meaningful trust relationship with people? But the answer is that it's probably impossible, because it's not how we work as humans. So the changes needed here in the city is way beyond the take of any single design team. And in any ways, we don't want our voice to be the only one to speak up. But because changes also has to then come from inside, we need to create the space, the public attention, the legal framework that provide routes for others in the city to come in and to do awesome urban interventions in ways that are not necessarily ours, but are going to be great as well. And I think to conclude, it doesn't mean that we are not planning on building a sustainable business. That just means that this whole thing is not about that. I think, I mean, we often paraphrase the Dean Ashin Sarkis title for the upcoming Venice Biennale of Architecture, and it says it's all about how are we going to live together. And I think in that, I think a big kudos to the whole Design X team and the whole Design X ethos to not be focusing solely on value capture, but on a much, much broader definition of impact. And if impact one day is like a line somewhere in a zoning code in a few years, maybe some might think that it's less sexy than gazillions of dollars or millions of products sold and so on and so on, but we don't necessarily agree, because we truly believe that impact doesn't only come with numbers, but it will come when, you know, spreading leadership and sharing power. And for that, as said before, groundwork and policy change could be our two best allies.
Katie, if quickly, I just wanted to add to this piece because of the question around including voices that might not be included typically. And one of the things that we did as part of our sustainability commitment was to embark on a partnership with a couple of organizations, transportation equity organizations, EV Noir and Grid Alternatives, to better understand the voice of drivers, what would actually help them make the decision to become, you know, to purchase an electric vehicle or operate an electric vehicle. What were the barriers? How could it happen? And it was just really illuminating. We, you know, took ourselves out of that process, made sure that, you know, the messenger were people that they were comfortable with, that we were very much in a learning mode and listening mode. And I think that perhaps doesn't happen often enough, but is really important. Even if you're not about scaling, but even for scaling, it's really important, because what becomes illuminated is, in the case of, you know, trying to think about Black and Brown communities who have been not part of marketing campaigns, unable to receive tax credits because perhaps their income levels don't hit the minimum to receive the tax benefit. There's significant oversight in just the way that we have designed policy. And without these voices, you can't get that change. So it ends up being, you know, I think it's really ends up being important, whether or not, and I think there's a lot of value in the local perspective and just doing that project, and maybe even one roof, to Olivier's point, is valuable if people feel empowered in doing it, but also in the scale and making it possible to have policy that supports many more people being involved.
Okay, thanks. So I'm told that we only have about 3 minutes left for this conversation, which is too bad, because I feel like we could continue on these topics for the rest of the day. But I want to make this into kind of a lightning round for our last question, and say that just, you know, in our own work in New York, we've seen the conversation shift dramatically in the past year around what's possible and what's possible on a really accelerated time frame, and what's urgent. And so I'm wondering, for each of you, have you perceived a similar shift or acceleration? And what do you think are kind of the main opportunities and the main potential drawbacks of such a shift to, you know, faster, more, bigger? And we will start with Shinpei on this one, please.
I'm really worried about the increase in private car driving, but to Justin's point, maybe it's an opportunity. Maybe people will just be so sick of the situation that they will want to do things differently. But I hope what remains is the flexibility that we're giving people, both in viewing spaces in their cities and how we can use them, and also, you know, the flexibility in the kinds of modes that they want to take, what will actually get people to what they need to do.
From my perspective, I think, yeah, a trip not taken is the best possible trip that's climate friendly. And the massive scale of information work and you know, clerical and administrative work that is now being done from home. We have entire call centers that have that used to have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people in a building at all hours of the day, making phone calls and receiving phone calls, now doing that from home. So there's been a huge shift, not just in the choice user, but also in the captive user who had to go to an office or had to go to a factory or had to go to a call center, that we have a lot of trip taking not taking place, which I think is really important and really impactful and powerful for communities. But at the same time, I also do worry about the insular nature that we have now adopted, the lack of social integration, lack of social cohesion, the bubbles that we formed may outlast this pandemic, and that does concern me.
Yeah, really quickly on the question of urgency and acceleration, it seems to us, our team, that the global story hasn't really changed for people who were born in the mid-90s, because we were taught, being raised, that wealth inequality was getting worse and worse, the climate degradation was going worse and worse, and pretty much nothing has changed. So every hour spent was another hour spent in the wrong direction. So how not to fall into frantic urgency, as you were saying? I mean, I actually think I have to confess that we are working under the sense of urgency, and I don't think it's necessarily good. I think it's something we have to balance. But it's a pretty complicated one. We often, as a light in the dark, share this quote and come back to it of feminist activist Adrienne Mary Brown, which goes, "There's such an urgency in the multitude of crises we face that it can make it hard to remember that, in fact, it is urgency thinking that got us to this point, and that our potential success lies in doing deep, slow, intentional work." So we cannot really say we're figured out. I think we're conscious of this, and we're trying to walk this fine line and adjust every day.
All right, I think that's a great note to end on. So thank you all to all of our panelists so much for your presentations and your voices in this conversation. And we will leave it at that. Thanks, everyone.